All right, back with Lisa and Ben here. You put out a really interesting press release recently, Lisa, and I think that's one of the things that you guys do a great job of is communication, and that's been something where the industry has been lacking for a long time, and also unification. This story of you and Drew Fleming, the CEO of the Breeders' Cup, sitting down with some of the leading executives across the sports industry, leaders from the NFL, NHL, NWSL, UFC, U.S. Soccer Federation, U.S. Equestrian Federation, to talk about some of the work you're doing and the progress that you've made. First of all, how did that happen? Like, well, how did you get all these people to come sit down with you? And then secondly, what were some of the top line takeaways from that meeting?
So first of all, we got them to come talk to us because, I worked at the NFL for 10 years. A number of us have been in different roles. Ben, Drug Free Sport International has, contact with basically all of the major league sports. And so we really reached out and we said, we'd love to invite you to the Breeders' Cup. And we'd love to sit down and have a conversation, on Friday. And it's going to be sort of off the record to start, we'll sort of see where it goes. And these are things we want to talk about, like how do you deal with the social license question? How do you deal with, concussions? Like what's your protocol? Sort of the whole gamut. And it was actually also interesting because we had a mix of medical doctors and executives. We had some medical doctors as well who are league doctors. And it was really just a great conversation. It was really organic. We had Lindsay Zarniak moderating it. So she was prepared with a lot of, like she normally is, enthusiastic with a lot of great questions. And it just really flowed. And then we learned, I think the biggest takeaway for me, which was something I had a gut feeling about anyways, but kind of really confirmed it for me, is you only get the public's trust about safety when you talk about it, when you actually address it. I think there are a lot of actors in horse racing, but also in other sports that think, if we just put that in a corner and we put it in a black box and we pretend it's not there, no one's going to worry about it. And, Jeff Miller from the NFL did a fantastic job of talking about, what the NFL's been through and how they've really tried to do that head on, is to try to really talk about safety, address concussions, show the helmets and all the changes that have been made. They've made a lot of changes to the playing rules, to protect their athletes against head injury. So that was a really big, takeaway for me is don't be scared to talk about it. You got to talk about it. Now, I do think that when we get to a point in horse racing where we're really not talking about it for the right reasons, that'll also be kind of modicum of success because it'll be an assumption that it's just there. But avoiding these more difficult topics never make them go away, and you lose trust, I think. So.
Yeah. No, definitely. And that's why I think the quarterly statistics are really important to put out there and publicize. And yeah, it's something that's been, I've lamented a little bit, like back when they were having all those breakdowns in Southern California in particular, that was blaring headlines all across the country. And California's done a really good job reducing those numbers. And it's barely been reported on. It's like page 18C, maybe a short blurb.
Only news when it's, bad.
Yeah.
One of the things I'd like to just add to that is, we are working incredibly hard at HISA every day to reduce the risk of horses getting injured and certainly fatalities. And we're definitely making headway. There's a lot more to go and a lot more to do, but we're making really marked progress. And I just want to remind the public, and I guess remind your listeners, that that is because of all of the ingredients that we put into creating that, right? Sort of baking the cake. And one of those key ingredients is the anti-doping program and a recognition, I think, by the industry that we're serious about it. And they have to not just be serious about, not cheating or not trying to get in the bank. I think that's really a small minority of trainers, but to just be really careful about what their horses come in contact with, right? And I really believe that that heightened professionalism, that care is one of the important ingredients that's helping us to reduce injury. For example, you talk about methamphetamine. Do we think methamphetamine gets into a horse intentionally by trainers? Almost probably not. I doubt it. We don't know for sure, but we certainly doubt it. But, we don't know. Maybe horses being exposed to meth is just really bad for them, right? You wouldn't want your kids exposed to meth. So, the enhanced scrutiny and care that we're all putting into avoiding that, I do think is an ingredient. And so when people complain again about how strict the anti-doping program is, for example, they've got to recognize that there's like an equilibrium there. And I believe we still have to do some work to get to that perfect point where it's the right amount of fairness with the right amount of rigor to get the ultimate, results. And that's what we're still kind of experimenting with, the different ingredients. But you can't say, I don't want a difficult anti-doping program and assume you're going to get the same results on the safety side. It's all linked together in my view.
Right. No, I think that's a very good point. The only thing I would correct you on, Lisa, is that when my kids were in high school, if I could have gotten them to go 6 furlongs in a minute 10 on meth, I probably would have, encouraged it. I don't know if I would have administered it, but I would have encouraged it at the very least.
There are exceptions to every rule.
There are exceptions to every rule, and certainly, for as a parent, you do things, for your kids, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Ben, I want to talk a little bit about the process of of having the labs in place. And now there's not only a different number of labs that you guys work through, but some of the players have changed. Some of the chairs have been shuffled. We don't have to go into which ones are in, which ones are out. But as far as the process goes, how are you guys vetting out the labs, and how has it gone so far?
It's a pretty comprehensive question. But if I can, I'll back up a little bit to talk about it in the beginning. A lot of our decision making in the beginning is reliant on the act itself, on the HISA Act. We were mandated to utilize RNTC accredited laboratories, and so at the time that I took this job and we started talking to labs, there were 9 RNTC accredited laboratories throughout the U.S. Okay, so we started having initial conversations with those labs, and so we're not mandated to absolutely work with each one. There has to be a negotiation. But ultimately, it's a kind of a dual decision where a state racing commission can decide that they want to continue utilizing their in-state laboratory if they choose to do so, and if HISA and HIWU can come to terms from a business sense, a contractual sense with that lab. Okay, so through the conversations, we went from 9 down to 6 contracted labs at that time. After that, also mandated in the rules, but there was a allowance for a transition and an extended period of time. So we are mandated to manage our own accreditation process. It's called HEAL, and it stands for Horse Racing Equine Analytical Laboratory Accreditation. Okay, it's the Series 6000 in the rules. This accreditation model is modeled after the World Anti-Doping Agency accreditation model, which manages all human anti-doping initiatives worldwide. And so this model is been proven to work. And currently there's about 30 laboratories accredited worldwide under the WADA code. Okay, so we have been working extensively with the RMTC on a transition period to get these labs in a position to be able to approve for HEAL accreditation. And that is coming soon in January of 2025. So we're about a month away to start our own accreditation process. There's a lot of similarities from the RMTC to the HEAL process. But one of the most important aspects that we had to work on in the past year or so was what's called the External Quality Assurance Program, the EQAP program. And so these are a series of different test samples that are sent out to the labs to essentially check their abilities and their performance. Before HEAL, before HIWU and HISA, the RMTC was doing some external quality samples, but not to the extent that HEAL is. What they were doing is what's called single blind samples. So single blind samples are when we have an outside vendor that essentially spikes a sample with a typically a common medication, could be a spiked blood or a urine sample, and it's wrapped up in a box and it's shipped to the lab, and it says right on it, this is a test sample, right? The labs will readily admit that when they see a test sample, they're throwing all their resources at this test sample to make sure that it's done properly, okay? The RMTC was doing that twice a year before HISA and HIWU. We have now started doing that twice a month with both single blinds and double blinds. And so a double blind sample is when we actually have a spike sample or a real sample that's pulled from a horse that had been administered a certain level of a medication or substance. And it looks just like any other sample. Could be a post-race. It's actually packaged and it's put together with an electronic chain of custody in the test barn. So we actually send these to test barns and to vets to ship to the labs. And when they open that box, it's with 30, 50, 90 other samples collected over the course of the last couple of days. And it's just going through routine analysis. That's happening now twice a month as well. And that had never been done before to this extent with the double blind samples. So when you see what's going on with some of the labs, I'm not going to talk about specific ones necessarily, but they are definitely being challenged in a way that they never have. And that is part of our quest for harmonization with these laboratories to ensure that they can test for all the substances they claim they can, that they are adequately staffed and taking the appropriate amount of time to look at these samples, to make sure that no matter what approved methodology or machines each individual lab may be using, because they're not required to use the same machines all the time. That would be impossible to try to get everyone to use the same machine and be on the same routine maintenance and on and on and on. But, there's many different methodologies that can end with the same result. Are they getting that same result, though, is what we're trying to figure out. And that's our quest here.
Right.
In the human anti-doping world, they've been doing this since the early 2000s, and they're still striving for harmonization in a lot of ways. Right. Because there's always new substances. There's always novel substances. There's always new technology that means we may be able to dive deeper and test the substances that everybody wants us to pick up at the lowest levels, right? We talk about picograms and things like that all the time. Well, John, you would want me to test for picograms for a substance like EPO, right?
Right.
No doubt.
Yeah.
You want me to try to get as low as we can on certain substances. So that's what we're trying to do here. And then the third quality assurance sample is called the past sample exchange. So essentially we will notify a lab like industrial and say, hey, we want you to pull these 20 negative samples that you've already called negative out of your freezer and ship them to the Pennsylvania lab. And we're going to have the Pennsylvania lab reanalyze them to make sure that nothing was missed in those negative samples. Now, it's not double jeopardy for the trainer who has those samples. It's just an investigative analysis. But, that was not being done as comprehensively as well. So that's the process that we're moving towards here in January. And it's, the other thing I would say is that now the labs are required to work together. Lisa, famously said, as I like to say, and when we talked about the UK lab in our press conference, that these labs in a lot of ways were working in silos. And so, they had multiple clients to report to with different racing commissions. And now with HIWU, with HISA, they all report to one client for all these samples being tested. And we can actually compare the information and ask the labs to work together. We have weekly lab calls where they all get on a call and we talk about what we're seeing on a weekly basis. And that's never happened before.
Yeah.
And that standardization and that communication and cooperation is huge.
And it's so important.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest game changers in terms of HISA and HIWU, because these labs, the underperforming labs, can't hide anymore. You got to show your work.
Exactly.
You got to show your work to your peers. You got to sit in those lab meetings. You've got to, you got to be at the same level. And the industry has never tested the labs in this way. And that's why you see many falling away, because not many, a couple falling away, because because, they're not able to meet those standards. And it's best for the industry to get down to a small number of labs that are consistent, that are harmonized, and that we can all trust.
Right.
Yeah. Like the fewer variables we have in the process, the better. Right. Last question from me. This was another great press release that you guys sent out that I think is really important. It's called Horse Insight. So it's a new tool for veterinarians that has like a holistic view of the horse's career and medical history so they can make better decisions. It has workouts and races and medications. And this makes me think of New York Thunder, who broke down last year in the H. Allen Jerkins on Travers Day. Now, he passed the vet. He ran in that race, presumably was sound, but if you go back and look at his medical history, all the injections he had, all the times he was scratched, all the disparity in terms of workouts, like how far apart they were, to me, that was a horse who was screaming that he was unsound. So I think that this kind of thing is huge to be able to have, like the press release says, have a more holistic view from the veterinarian side or whether or not this horse is sound enough to run. What do you envision this having? What kind of impact do you envision this having on the industry? And then B, just very simply, how can we make sure that regulatory vets can access it?
So to start with, one of the things that has been really important for HISA from the get-go is that we're not just making rules and like sound people, we're actually trying to give information, back to the industry, and that given all of the data requirements we place now on veterinarians and trainers, we want them to benefit from the fact they're putting their time in to give us that data, right? And so I think you're absolutely right that now what the regulatory vets can access is essentially the horse's last few years, right? And one kind of snapshot, and they can print it and look at it and analyze it. And it just enhances the information that is quickly at their fingertips considerably. Because as you're right, regulatory vets, they have to examine the horse on the day. But if they have no idea or they're not able to look in that moment at what's happened in the last couple of months, it's much more difficult to make an informed decision. And so we think this is a tool that is really going to help them. Like, they're all really excited about it. We have, within HISA's database, we have different security groups. So if you are registered as a reg vet, which is always, double checked and verified, and the reg vets are, our veterinary team, Dr. Jennifer Durenberger, Dr. Sherry Silverman, Dr. Karen Hassan, they work directly with those vets all the time. Then you can access it, and we know that they are accessing it. At least the ones, we still have a few that are a little bit older that are not really a little scared of a computer, but the ones that aren't are accessing it. And it's just one of the things that we've found. When you get outside of New York and Kentucky and California, there's really a shortage of reg vets, right?
Yeah.
And we want to empower the reg vets to be able to credibly and efficiently examine as many horses as possible pre-race. I mean, there are some jurisdictions that didn't even have pre-race exams for HISA, So, you might have a regulatory vet look at 200 horses on the backside, in a single day. So the more we can give them to expedite that process and make it easier and give it, the chance to have a higher quality, we're going to keep doing that. So I think there's a lot more to come in that respect.
And is this something that they can access on the HISA website, on the portal? Like, how do they get to it?
The reg vets access it on the portal.
Okay.
They also can access it from their phone, but they have to go into the portal, go to the website. Yeah, and they're on the portal a lot because they have a lot of obligations to us, including reporting injuries, fatalities, entering records, whatever it is.
Yeah, no, I mean, all that data collection can be a pain sometimes, but we're looking for revelatory information that can keep horses safe. So it's another, I think, potential game changer that you guys are introducing.
I hope so. Yeah. Time will tell, but we're really excited about it, and we're pretty optimistic that it'll have a big impact.
Same here. Yeah. Well, Lisa and Ben, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for the time. Thank you for answering the tough questions. You guys are very accessible. Lisa, you've done a great job answering criticism. So if anybody has anything in the comments that they want us to ask Lisa or Ben, please write in, and I'm sure that she'll get back to you. So thanks for the time, guys.
All right. Thanks
Absolutely.
so much.
Thank you.